Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Cassandra Etienne. I'm Assistant Director at the Center for Cooperative Media. We're so happy that you could join us for today's discussion on climate change and disaster preparedness in New Jersey. These are topics that are critical and unfortunately highly relevant to New Jersey communities in the aftermath of and in the devastating impact of extreme weather events such as Hurricane Ida and Hurricane Ian. This event is part of the Not Your Same Old Sources series. It features experts from our diverse sources database. It's a publicly available sortable list of experts of different races, genders, ages, and ethnicities. This panel is presented by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University in partnership with NJ.com, New Jersey Ethnic and Community Media, and event sponsor Princeton University's Office of Communications. A big thank you to our host, Steven Rodas, climate and environment reporter for NJ Advanced Media, and our guest, Maria Lopez-Nunez, Director of Environmental Justice and Community Development for the Ironbound Community Corporation, who you'll meet shortly. And thank you to everyone who could participate on this call with us today. I'll just turn it over to Joe, who'll give us some brief announcements to help ensure that things flow smoothly on the tech side of things. And also a shout out to Oni Advincula, who will also be on hand to help us field questions when we get to that portion of the event. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Cassandra. And again, thank you, Maria, and to Stephen for this. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown really quickly of what you can expect and how you can interact with our esteemed guests today. As you know, with Zoom, you have the chat. It's open. Post your thoughts, comments, questions in there. Center staff, Cassandra and Oni, will be monitoring that chat to make sure that if you do ask a question and you'd like it to be answered by one of our panelists, that we will read that out loud for you if you'd like. If you'd like to ask a question yourself, you're more than welcome to just use the raise hand feature, which can be found under the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. It's a little smiley face, and right across the bottom it says raise hand, and you'll see I have my hand raised now. That'll let us know that you'd like to ask a question out loud, and then we'll ask you to unmute and do so when it's time. If you have any issues, you can send a DM in this Zoom chat here by just changing the to button. It's a little blue button that says everyone now. But if you click that, you should be able to select one of the co-hosts. Cassandra, Oni will do their best to help you out if you're experiencing any technical difficulties throughout this session. So I've talked enough. I'm going to go ahead and bring our esteemed host up, Steven Rodas. Steven, you want to introduce yourself and then introduce our co-host here you're going to have a conversation with. Take it away.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Cassandra. I really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good Wednesday. My name is Steven Rodas. I am the climate and environmental reporter here at NJ Advanced Media.
Yes, thank you. And I'm Maria Lopez-Nunez with Ironbound Community Corporation. For those of you that don't know, even though you should by now, Ironbound's a neighborhood in the city of Newark, the city of Newark being the largest city in our great state of New Jersey. Ironbound Community Corporation, we're 53 years old. We were founded by the community because they needed access to childcare. And then, of course, like as is New Jersey's legacy in the 70s and 80s, when there started being chemical explosions, we realized you can't just invest in education. You need to really think about the whole environment that a child is in if you want them to excel. So that includes the air that they're breathing, the water that they're drinking, and the food that they have access to. So that's how we kind of started on an environmental justice journey, and are really excited to be here to talk about climate and the impacts in New Jersey.
Yeah, absolutely, Maria. And I mean, we could start on part of what you mentioned, which is I guess growing up, what some young residents in New Jersey experience that they might feel is the norm, but in reality isn't the norm. I was born and raised in Jersey City, in the Heights section of the city, and the public school I went to had water fountains that were covered by plastic. That was something that I walked down the hallway and that was normal, and we know that's not. And that is happening in other degrees and in other fashions in other places. I guess could you talk a little bit more about the link between education and those sort of glimpses into like climate justice or injustices in some cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here in the Ironbound, we have some schools that were built during the times of Abe Lincoln, right? Like really old schools whose infrastructure has not been upgraded. And that's something you see in urban centers all throughout the country. Forget about New Jersey, just everywhere. old buildings that have never really had the maintenance or upgrades that they need. So in the Ironbound, we see that like at Wilson Avenue School, there is groundwater contamination on the bottom, and they've had different moments of like vapor intrusion that come into the school. We've also had cases of black mold at that very same school. And then that school was one of the ones named during the Newark lead crisis, right? Because the pipes, both the pipes in the city, but the pipes leading up to the school had never been upgraded. They were leaching lead into the water fountains. So when we're thinking about an environmental justice community, I want to backtrack a little bit here. We just passed 2 years ago the strongest environmental justice law in the country, S232, and it protects communities that are defined by either being 40% people of color or non-English speaking, or 35% low income, right? Because that's acknowledging that in our society, racism and classism are real, and there are systematic reasons that people who are not white have less access to good schools, to good education, to healthy food, to clean water. And so in the state of New Jersey, there's an acknowledgement that the state has participated in that. And so our environmental justice communities require more protection. So of course, it's only natural that in school buildings, we need to think about the infrastructure and then make sure that we are keeping track and monitoring the situation quite closely. Then, of course, there's what happens to schools during storms. A lot of our schools are also in floodplains because our communities are in floodplains. And so it's important that as climate change is in fact impacting the state of New Jersey, especially when we hear that the state of New Jersey is going to be pretty hard hit in terms of sea level rise and the increase in rainstorm. In our neighborhood, when it rains, you can't pick up the kids, right? Like it's something I hear from parents all the time, because the floods to the schools are roads to the school are flooded. So it's going to be something that, a lot of underlying societal issues will keep compounding on top of each other and making the situation worse for communities of color throughout the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, definitely. And we know as of the fall of 2022, climate change is now installed in the curriculums of public schools in New Jersey. So that sort of also being another avenue for when I've spoken with certain experts and teachers and principals about sort of giving the young folks more of a foundation than maybe people that grew up in New Jersey years ago didn't have, to understand what's happening and also their role in what's happening and what they can do, partly through a solutions-based perspective. Because I know sometimes in covering the climate and in looking at what's happening in the world and in coastal states like New Jersey, it could be a little bit doom and gloom, or some people can sort of get into that mindset they can't help it. And in talking about flooding, Maria, you sort of brought to mind something that I'm sure is on a lot of minds, is the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. That'll be in 10 days from today. And we know from, the state that 38 people died tragically because of Sandy, and the state experienced over $30 billion in damage. And I just wanted to, I guess, pick your brain on what comes to mind for you when you think about the fact that we're about to hit the 10th anniversary of the superstorm.
Yeah, of course. What comes to mind is, are we ready? Are we ready for another storm? I think Ida and Henry before that showed us that we're not really ready for another superstorm or even a hurricane in the state of New Jersey, and I think largely in the Northeast, right? I'm not sure. I know that people want to be inspired, but to be inspired, we need to see the state and our communities do inspirational things. During Ida, there was probably 29 people died in the state of New Jersey during Ida. And most of the folks that died in their cars, right? But then we're seeing like the Department of Transportation be really resistant to flood rules, emergency flood rules that are being proposed in the state of New Jersey. So they don't want to elevate the roads. That's really simple. We need to probably elevate those roads that flood during high rain events, because otherwise people might continue to die in their cars needlessly. Yesterday, I was at a press conference hearing that the state of New Jersey is going to sue the 5 fossil fuel companies for climate change damages. So that's a step in the right direction. You know, probably we should have had that happen a while ago, but I'm happy that the state is moving in that direction, because it shows that, first off, New Jersey believes climate change is real and that we want to do something about it. We're acknowledging that companies have lied to our society and that we need to take that seriously, take them to court and then hold them accountable. But I would say we need to hold ourselves accountable on, like, how are you pushing your local government to take climate change more seriously and include it as part of the planning? I know that overdevelopment is a problem everywhere in New Jersey, right? We see it in Newark, Jersey City, Patterson, Camden. All the cities are having onslaught of buildings going up and the rents going up with them. So we want to make sure that if people are barely paying for rent, that they're at least protected in those new construction, and that they're being built to flood standards, like updated flood standards that take into account climate change.
Yeah, and already mentioned the flood rules that we actually had a update about this morning. There was a meeting, the DEP, a few folks from the DEP discussed the fact that they will now be moving toward a regular, flood rule plan versus an emergency plan, which I know in speaking with some environmentalists, they mentioned that that is sort of a setback. They think of this as an emergency, and they feel like that this should happen on an emergency basis, not on a regular rule basis. Did you have any reaction to that update from earlier today?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unexpected, right? And I want to see the state just do more and do it faster, because flood rules are a tiny piece of the puzzle. We need updates in municipal zoning. We need a storm preparedness plan on the state level that thinks about, one of the things we've been exploring a lot in Ironbound, because of right now we're fighting against a fourth natural gas plant. We already in our 4 square mile neighborhood have 3 natural gas plants that power and give electricity to people. But all these power plants are in floodplains. And so the sewage treatment facility, which during Sandy, actually, it went down for, I think, only 48 hours. They want a backup generation plant, which really means a personal power plant for that facility. So we've been thinking about, what does it mean for there to be mobile microgrids? That means that if one facility loses power, we can send a truck full of batteries that have been charged, hopefully by renewable energy sources, but they've been charged before the storm. We can send that over, and that can power the facility while they have lost power. And I think that should be the model, because we can't afford for everybody that feels at risk to build their own power plants, right? It's like a really ridiculous situation where we're saying we need to be prepared for climate change by contributing to climate change, and I think that we're definitely smarter than that. And so I would like the whole state to explore more innovative technologies and solutions to the problems that we face.
Yeah, I mean, and on your note about elevation and flooding and being prepared for that, I know in talking with a few experts for a few stories we're working on now that we're getting closer to the 10th anniversary, people have mentioned that a lot of the places that flooded because of Sandy in large swaths are just back. They are back. If you look at areas like Union Beach, like Maniloking, other communities that were really hard hit by the storm, homes are elevated, but there are homes in a lot of these sections of New Jersey. I guess does that concern you? Does that point to anything for you? Any insights about just optically what that communicates?
Yeah, no, for sure. It communicates a little bit of denial on the part of government officials, but it's complicated, right? Because communities live in places that get flooded. The whole Ironbound is a floodplain, like I said, and we're a threat from Newark Bay coming in from the river, and also because we have old pipes. We have what's called the combined sewer overflow problem, where the pipes from the street and the pipes from the home, they go into the same pipe. And so when it rains, after 10 minutes, those pipes can't handle that level of water, especially because cities like Newark are just all concrete. There's, what's called impervious surface, which means that the water can't get through to the ground to be soaked up. So they just hit the concrete and run off to the sewer. And that's what leads to the sewer getting filled up faster. People are going to build back where they live, and people are attached to communities. So I do think that there is more nuance here, and that's why the government needs to have conversations with each community. And I know that sometimes they're like, that's just too labor intensive to actually talk to people, but that's what a government's supposed to do. It's supposed to talk to communities and make sure that everybody has the best plan for their neighborhood. And so some people will choose to build back, as we've seen, but I think not everyone knows the risk or can afford to go somewhere else. So we're going to have to think innovatively of, do we need programs to relocate people who might live in places that are not going to be inhabitable as the climate accelerates, right? I am worried about all the, they're saying that the Atlantic coast is going to become a hurricane hotbed. And we're seeing it every year. We're getting these record-breaking storms. Last year when Ida hit, Henry had broke the record for rainfall just the week before at 2 feet. Then Ida came and it took us over to 8 feet in 11 inches, sorry, not feet, 2 inches in one day, and then 11 inches in one day. And so those are big deals. And if our government doesn't take it seriously, it sends a bad message to the community to take it seriously.
Yeah, I think in Newark, if my reporting is correct, yes, the 1 hour record was broken in Newark, 3.65 inches from what I saw. So the rainfall, really coming down in unprecedented ways, sort of forcing folks to deal with just very, everyday sort of tasks and much more complicated matters, and not being prepared in a lot of cases, from what people have said. I mean, you mentioned how it's tough to talk to people. I know one thing, myself being at yesterday's press conference, for example, people that, are babysitting kids or working, but they can't ask questions at these events because they can't, on a very practical level, be there themselves. Like sometimes it is a matter of that. I guess, what do you feel about the job that the media does in terms of representing those voices, representing people in those communities and the folks that might not feel like, are always put at the forefront?
I mean, I think the media does a pretty bad job, to be honest. When it comes to climate change, I think the picture is always white. It's too often white, right? When it comes to environmental issues, the picture is too often white. And so when you do that, you alienate those that are most vulnerable, right? The communities that are going to be the hardest hit are communities of color and low income folks. So when you put folks that, look like they live in the suburbs, like they have wealth, and they're talking about saving the environment, it seems like it's an issue that is disconnected from our urban centers. And I can tell you during Sandy, that was especially the case. The fact that we're still honoring Sandy as the biggest event, even though it was 10 years ago and a similar amount of people died during Ida, people were in their apartments during Ida and were flooded out. There are folks now that are have nowhere to live because Ida flooded out their apartments and it led to black mold, and then the building was condemned by the city, and there's no recourse or place for them to go. FEMA's not responding and the state's not responding. And I would say that it's because of the demographic of people that were impacted by Ida versus the demographic of people that were impacted by Sandy. So reporters have been, of course, reaching out a lot about Sandy to me with the anniversary coming up. And like I said, I struggle with the racial representation of who's impacted by climate change and who cares about climate change, because Black and brown folks are at the forefront of fighting for against pipelines that will continue contributing to climate change. They're at the forefront, like in Newark, fighting against power plants that are to be built in our city, or sludge plants, sludge facilities. We are fighting against waste incinerators. There's so much work to be done because of the history of environmental racism in this country. And so I wish that the media would be able to just represent that, and two, to capture more nuance, because these stories are not yes or no. There's many shades of gray here because people are affected by many different issues. It's, I struggle with it even in my own work. There's the environmental side of it, but then there's also the housing side of it. We worry if we make the neighborhood nicer, will the neighborhood just get more gentrified? And these are complicated things that require a little bit more investigative journalism instead of just a feel-good story sometimes of one character that made it out okay. I think we need to tell that nuance, and then we can get to the beauty of the people who are in the struggle, the people who win, and the people who are surviving it all.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about the people that don't see themselves reflected, and that these topics are complicated. Sometimes it's not as easy as don't build that or build that. Sometimes even just navigating some of the nuance of the topic itself is, has its layers. And then there are the layers of reporting on it and representing it accurately and appropriately, and giving like a space for people to, have their say and feel like they are, being represented well. I'd like to very much broadcast that I am bilingual, can read, speak, and write Spanish. And there are lots of instances where, unfortunately, people I talk to are being interviewed for the first time by a reporter, or have been exposed to media coverage for the first time. And sometimes it can come down to just not feeling like there's someone that speaks their native language that they can feel comfortable with, really having a real discussion about how they're impacted as a resident. If I guess we could zoom out a little bit, is there any topic that that you feel isn't given as much space in the media when it comes to climate activism, or climate at large? There's been tons about the anniversary, like you mentioned. There's information about flooding, what's happening now with the state and its move to sue the companies, oil and gas companies, because of burning of fossil fuels, and we touched on that a bit too. Is there anything else that comes to mind? Anything that you feel like, I don't see this pop up in my feed a lot. I don't really see this given as much breath.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more folks learn about the actual health impacts, right? Because climate change seems kind of a little intangible, right? It's not as always as clear or direct. And like in Newark, one thing I always say is, like, if you're a fourth grader, you can stand in a corner and look around at the different smokestacks. And then that in your class, most of the kids have asthma, right? So you can connect what's happening in our neighborhood directly to what's happening in your class, right? Like, it's not hard to connect smoke to asthma. And I would like for the media to talk more about that. To see it more illustrated of what does it actually mean. Because when I say we're fighting a fourth power plant, there are people who are like, great, more power, we'll have more power in our neighborhood. They don't even really understand how the electrical grid works, and the fact that we're generating electricity actually for New York City. We're not generating electricity for the people of the Ironbound or for the people of Newark. Our incinerator, 50% of that trash comes from New York City, so our system is broken in so many different ways that I wish, and I understand it's not like the sexiest news, where's the trash going? But we need to learn where does our trash go? And we're talking about electrifying everything. Yeah, but where's our electricity coming from? We can't we keep putting the blame on everyday people. And that's another thing that I guess hurts me, is we tell everyone that the reason we have so much trash is because people don't have a tote bag. They're not recycling enough. But then 90% of what we put in the recycling bin doesn't get recycled, right? These are systematic themes that I would like to see covered. And getting to the root of the problem, which is really about how we've let corporations make laws that don't always benefit people. And really, corporations should help people, right? Like, because they're there and they're made up of people, and they should help the communities that they live in. So if trash is being burned, it should only be the neighborhood's trash, the city's trash. It shouldn't be trash from all over the place. We have a sewage treatment facility that brings in waste from 12 other states, right? And when I'm saying waste, because I'm trying to be respectful here, I'm talking about when you flush the toilet type sewage treatment facility, right? And those are in open pits in our neighborhood. So I would love all these regular issues illustrated. And I know that that's not sexy, but as a society, we do need to learn more about the behind the scenes of what keeps us working. Otherwise, I think it's easy to keep us ignorant.
I guess, like, to that point, and I mean, if you disagree, but not always being newsy, not always exactly being tied to something that's happening that you might call, like, that it's timely. It's more like part of a series of things that have been happening that impact people in very simple, but that doesn't mean devastating ways. The people that we've talked to, the people that we've sort of reached out to on a variety of topics, a lot of the time their lives are being interrupted in very basic, practical, what some might say non complicated ways, but but those are the same folks in a lot of cases that want to be eco-friendly, that want to better their state, that love New Jersey, that love, you know, their neighborhood, their community. Sometimes it's just not always feasible from what they've shared to take steps that other folks might find more easy to do. I like what might be some you know, financial barriers like would you say that get in the way of people, for example, getting an electric vehicle, or you know, recycling in a way that they might deem, you know, more appropriate, or, you know, is there anything else that comes to mind that just not as easy to do for everybody and for every family, unfortunately?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, buying an electric vehicle, the average cost is $40,000. And then when I think about the average medium income in my neighborhood, it's about $32,000 for a family of four. So that those numbers don't add up, right? Like they're not going to buy an electric vehicle or even a used electric vehicle. These are not necessarily the common sense solutions I'm looking for. I'm more like, how do we transition this power plant from running on fossil fuels to running on renewable? In Newark, only 40% of people in Newark don't own a car. So they just might never get a car. And so how do we invest more in public transportation? What I would say that people can do that's free, it takes time, but it is free. And I know that time's not free, but getting more actively engaged, just showing up at a city council meeting, and you'll be surprised what you learn. You know, what you learn, because democracy is not just about voting. Voting is important and an essential step in democracy, but we need to really deepen that of, and you know, I love what you were saying, Steven, about an educational series, because I do think the media should educate and help highlight things that we don't learn in school, but that are important for the functioning of society. And one of those things is being able to go to city council meetings where decisions are made about the laws of your town, being able to go to zoning board. I venture to say most people don't know what the zoning board is, but we're really proud in Ironbound of having a lot of educational workshops to teach people how zoning works, because folks see buildings going up, right? Like who decided to put that there? Who made the park over here? And they don't understand zoning is what determines that. So we've been able to illustrate that for residents and then get them to show up and demand, you know, actually this building should have more trees. This building should not be that tall. Like be able to have input and realize that, you know, your voice can make a difference. And especially when you show up with all your neighbors, you can make a big difference in the way that your neighborhood looks. And that makes a direct impact in your life. So those are things people can do, and there's no financial barrier. It's just about working out the time. But there's meetings at all times, right? There's during the day, lunch hours, evening. Unfortunately, I don't know any city council meetings that are on the weekends, but if you're able to swing an evening every now and then, it's a great educational experience. And I would recommend people do it with their families.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note of engagement, one thing that I know I've been pleasantly surprised about since the summer and looking at climate more closely has been all the young people involved in the space, smart, scrappy, very much a group that you in New Jersey are sort of getting out of their way because they know what they want. They're very driven, and they, I mean, in one case, I spoke with Milagro Blanco from your organization. She was one of the folks I've spoken with. I guess what role do you see them playing, and what have you seen in terms of what progress they've made, or what, you know, what they've shared with you about what they want to see in New Jersey going forward?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I feel so blessed to know people like Milagro, who have grown up in our programs. Like I said, Ironbound, there's colleagues I work with that went to preschool at the community center at the community school that Ironbound runs. So this is definitely intergenerational work. And I look up to my elders who have been doing this work in our community for 47 years, right? So there are folks that have been here to see all the changes in our neighborhood to give us hope that it can get better, and it has gotten better. And there's folks like Milagro who, you know, are in their early 20s, but really dedicating themselves to this work. And it's because they were able to learn in a workshop when they were a teenager to learn what those smokestacks are. And that looks like the background, bringing that to the foreground and saying, oh, that's something I might get engaged with. I don't like to fetishize young people and say, oh, they're the future. I think we're all the future, as long as you're breathing and you're attending meetings, anybody can get into this work at any point. And so we do see elders coming into the work for the first time, and young people and people with their babies, bringing their babies on their first march for clean air against yet another power plant. So I feel like there's entry points no matter what your age is, but I am obviously very excited to see the people that were engaged early on, and now as they're developing into adulthood are deciding to make this the life path that they want to pursue, right? And of course, I'm very dedicated to making sure that we support that as an institution, because the more we cultivate people from our communities, the more of a difference it's going to make, because too many people that work on this issue don't live in a vulnerable community. And I can't stress how much we need to send to the experience of people that can tell you exactly where it floods. They could tell you exactly what time of the day it smells bad because the incinerator's running or the fat rendering plant is acting up. Those people are the real experts. And sometimes we turn to scientists that have only looked at things in a model projection. They don't live it every day. They don't have to deal with the flooding, the bad smells, or the people that don't want to clean up the mold because the roof leak came in because of all the rainfall.
As a journalist, I know for me, one interview that left an impression happened in 2020, speaking with folks in the Waterfront South community of Camden, New Jersey, that described their homes shaking and explosions from nearby industry, work, and becoming, in some cases, accustomed to it. In other cases, not knowing they were accustomed to it until they had children and saw their reactions to it, and then sort of had like a eureka moment, saying, "Oh, wait, this has been happening, but I let myself become, used to it, unfortunately." So yeah, I mean, to that point, it's something that manifests itself in different ways, depending on where you live, and I guess sometimes in the same ways. Because of how New Jersey is made up. We talked a little bit about the media side of communicating these topics. I wonder what you thought of how the state and local governments communicate climate change related issues and matters and resources to residents of all backgrounds and those who don't speak English as a first language.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of improvement to be made, and maybe there's a great opportunity for media to partner with local governments to put their message out there. I mean, I've been seeing local governments try harder. I do have to mention, I sit on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and it's the first of its kind, right? So we were able to bring this neighborhood story to a national level. And what we talk about a lot is like municipal governments are often confused as being a stand-in for the community. And people don't realize that even municipal governments have relationship building and trust issues that they need to overcome with their local neighborhood people, right? Like the regular person doesn't even know sometimes, like, I'm like, who's our city council person? And they might not know who it is, right? We see it during election season and then it goes away a little bit. And so one part of our work is trying to encourage more community meetings, or for elected officials to just show up to community meetings that it might be happening about something else. I think that's really incredibly important so that people can like know the face of who's in office and who's making a difference. One project I'm a part of that I'm really proud of is Resilient New Jersey, right? Ironbound Community Corporation is on the steering committee, and that's about trying to address this. I won't get nerdy. See, this is where it gets wonky, and I'm like, this is where we lose people. But it's about the long-term control plan, which is, like I was mentioning before, the pipes, they go in, like, the sewer in the house, they go to the same pipe. We need to replace those. And what we replace them with kind of matters. And if it was up to our government, they'd go with the cheapest thing, which is like putting these concrete tanks underneath the ground. That's the cheapest thing. That's called gray infrastructure. What communities tend to want is something called green infrastructure, which is like plants and trees that actually manage the water, but they also feel better, right? Like, doesn't it feel nicer to walk down a street that has plants and like tree coverage on it? So that's kind of what Resilient New Jersey has been modeling, is how community groups can actually be a stakeholder along with municipal governments and their water utilities to come up with a solution together. And we do those meetings in Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, and English, right? To try to make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can, depending on the community, because it's not just in Newark, but it's also for Jersey City and Bayonne and Hoboken, right? Like, who's the community you're trying to reach? You have to speak their language.
Yeah, not nerdy at all, but I know personally there are some topics and matters and things that come up that do take me some time to sit down and say, all right, let me get my head really around this. And when I finally get it, I do feel like I need to share this with everybody kind of feeling. So I completely relate to that. I don't know, Cassandra, should we take some questions from folks in the audience or Oni?
Yeah,
Sure.
so we have a couple of questions there, and let's start with Kimmy. She said, is there any regulation in place that will prevent power plants from being sited in flood or sited in floodplain areas?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's a specific regulation, but there are updated flood rules for new facilities that have to be more flood proof, which is great. Like, some of the facilities in Ironbound are outdated. So we have Newark Bay cogeneration. It's about 40 years old. So obviously it wasn't built with modern regulations in place. However, we have Newark Energy Center that just opened up in 2016, which was post-Sandy. That one is more flood resistant. So it's more about how they flood-proof the building. You know, like PVSC right now is building, that's a sewage treatment facility. They're building a flood wall around their property. So everybody's getting flood ready, but there is no rule specifically against being in the floodplain. It's more about how you mitigate possible risk, which is obviously of concern to our community. Most of the facilities in our neighborhood do not have an emergency preparedness plan. So, you know, I don't know, that's not comforting, but it's something for all of us to look into if dangerous facilities have emergency preparedness plans.
Yeah, and we know there's also a bill currently being considered that would expand flood disclosure so that people that are buying a home or you know, or even renting a home, going somewhere for the first time and, you know, settling in, being much more informed about where they land in the floodplain. And then back on the topic of power plants, I mean, I guess part of it is that it is in their interest to be, you know, protected and to elevate themselves. But yeah, to your point, Maria, I don't think there's anything specific that drills down into that, you know, into that sort of requirement.
I know, but you know what I like about the question? It illustrates that we would assume, you know, I gave a tour last Saturday and people are like, why were they allowed to build there? I'm like, that's not how rules work. I think, you know, for us people that we always say, oh, I don't trust the government. We have a lot of trust that someone's looking out for us. And that's why I'm like, that's why you actually do need democracy and people to participate, because we will be surprised how much the rules have loopholes or lack considerations that we assume would be there that would protect the everyday person.
We have this question. This was sent through direct message from Marie Carmen Amado. I want to ask Marie Carmen to ask her question. Marie Carmen, if you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My question was if there is any project to provide community educations in all the towns and cities in New Jersey for our people learn about how to recycle in regular basis and help in composting in order to help to avoid the, you know, the climate damage.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm not sure, right? Our organization is just neighborhood
I think
based.
Maria, I think you might be muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it seems like the host muted me. Okay, so I am not entirely sure of what's available on the state level, but I do know that in New Jersey, what I'm happy about is we're requiring climate change education in K through 12, right? So that should hopefully mean that more people are learning about how climate change happens and what they can do about it in the formal schooling. but we're also working with DEP. I know that DEP is Department of Environmental Protection is very interested in bringing environmental justice education to more communities. ICC, Ironbound Community Corporation, is part of a coalition with other incinerator impacted communities in Camden and Rahway, where we've been having a liberation from incineration workshop series to help educate people about how they can help stop contributing to the incineration of trash, what incineration of trash, what's the health impacts that it might have in a community, and then how to look out for harmful messaging from that. You know, sometimes community corporations greenwash their products, and the residents might not know that's actually greenwashing, right? And this is the impact that it actually has in your community. And that's, I really believe that any decisions we make about our community should be from an informed place. And in decisions that's not informed, it's not really a good decision. And so we're trying to do our job to raise awareness, but of course, I would like to see more organizations doing work throughout the state.
This is a question related to that, Maria. This is from Clivel Mercano of Reporte Hispano, and he asked me to read his question. There are two questions there. So the work that you've done in Ironbound in fighting to stop pollution is remarkable, but that experience, how can that be transferred to other communities in the state that also suffer from high pollution, but whose communities are not working together to solve this problem? That's the first question. And then he said, energy gas prices in New Jersey have risen, in some cases as much as 25% this year. You believe that projects like the NJ Coastal Wind Farm could be a solution to lowering energy and gas prices?
Okay, so let's see. Let's take them one at a time. Well, one, of course, we as Ironbound Community Corporation, we try to help out any other community that's in need by just sharing our experience, because it's surprising how much you can learn from someone else's mistakes. And as an organization that's been around for 53 years, we've made a lot of mistakes. So always happy to share. And actually, just last night, I got a message from someone in Camden because the scrap metal yard facility was on fire again, and they had to be evacuated, right? And they were asking Ironbound, because we've had similar issues with our scrap metal facilities that have been catching on fire. I don't know if y'all were following, but a couple months ago, within 30 days, you know, in Port Newark and then also in Camden, there were several scrap metal facilities that caught on fire. And so it is important that communities that are impacted by similar issues band together. So then we could make shared pleas to the state to say, you know, both Camden and Newark are suffering from this. What are you going to do with scrap metal yards? There clearly something is going wrong if they're catching on fire. We saw that big fire that happened in Passaic, right, where the chlorine factory caught on fire, and how harmful that must have been to the residents nearby that had to inhale that smoke. I mean, you can see that fire from Newark, and, you know, Passaic is not that close by. So it's important that when things like this happen, that we understand our communities have to be in solidarity with each other. Because just as we see a chlorine fire happening in Passaic, if there are industrial sites near your home, that could happen to you. So it's important to reach out to those folks, see what we can do together to make sure that if it happens in Passaic, it doesn't happen again. And that we change the regulation that allows people to get away with, you know, just sloppy practices. Where they're dealing with hazardous materials many of the times, and if they're being sloppy, it could create a big risk for the nearby residents. So of course, we'll always happy to help, but we also need, there's statewide coalitions like the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance that are there specifically to help communities throughout the state learn more about what rights they have access to and what are the community processes that they should be interacting with. Because I'll tell you, I never knew the things I've learned in this job of watching permits, reading permits to figure out, like, you know, what are they asking? Are they asking to burn more chlorine? Wait, that doesn't sound healthy, right? A lot of things are actually, even though they're in like engineer speak, when you break them down, regular people can raise a red flag. This doesn't sound okay. Or what's the safety protocol? And that's something that regular folks should be on the lookout for. In terms of gas prices, look, Gas prices get so politicized, of course. And I mean, we all feel it, right? In New Jersey, that's why we need more public transportation, because we can't just depend on cars forever. And it's really hard to get around in New Jersey. You can get out of New Jersey pretty fast. We like to say in Newark, but if you're going to another town nearby, good luck waiting for that bus. Of course, I want a projects like the wind farms, right? And I also want to make sure that where are these wind turbines? Because you know, I'll be honest, I was watching Game of Thrones and I saw the wind turbine, like the windmills, and I'm like, oh wow, that technology has actually been around forever. We should not keep acting like wind is new. It's a tried and true way to get electricity. We don't have to burn dinosaurs to get electricity. And I feel like more people in New Jersey should know that. But also that we should be manufacturing the wind turbines in cities that need jobs. That's going to be a great job creator. And I want people who are in 5th grade now to be learning about the jobs in the wind industry. Because that's, you know, wind's not just going to happen overnight. It's going to happen in over 10 years. And so we should be preparing our young people for that workforce. And you know, I do think it's a solution to lowering energy and gas prices, but more than creating more electricity, I think it's about regulating the electric market better, because our public utility is allowed to raise our rates over and over again. PSE&G raises the rates for everything, and everything that they invest in, the ratepayers pay. So everybody that pays an electric bill, you should have a saying where that electricity is coming from, and you know, the lobbying that public utility companies do to our local government. So I think that's important. And again, it's about getting engaged.
Yeah, I mean, on the wind farms, I can add, yeah, I mean, and George R.R. Martin, writer of Game of Thrones, is from Bayonne, so it's all Jersey related. On the point of from the media side, when it comes to you know, high pollution and you know, the communities that suffer from it, I know for us, like part of it too is going beyond that daily story, because to your point, Maria, there are times where folks from across the state are reaching out to each other. You just might not know it if you don't take that extra step and ask that extra question or do that extra interview, or, you know, get out and immerse yourself in the community or neighborhood, because you'll find that a lot of people in New Jersey are connected. That's probably true of other topics, but I've found that it's especially true in the climate space. You'll talk to one person and ask for a referral, and then you're talking to like 6-7 people, and everyone is sort of very much aware about what's happening elsewhere. And that's only to the benefit of the state. You know, you can only imagine how that could sort of bear fruit. It just sort of takes that extra work, but you know, it's worth it in the end.
We have 2 more questions, and we have only like 11 minutes left. This one is from Maria Lopez-Nunez. How easy is it to access public documents regarding environmental issues?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's not easy. It should be easy theoretically. Most permits go to your local library, right? Who would know that? I wish I could see everyone on this call and say, like, I don't know that people know to go to their local library to figure out what a local power plant is doing. So the permits get filed there, and they're these big giant binders, so it's like hundreds of pages long, and I think that that's incredibly inaccessible. Sometimes they are online. You can find them in data miner. You can find violations of companies, and you could search them by address. That's also hard. Like, most people don't know what data miner is or how to use that. It's a little bit of an outdated website. So I would love to see, you know, we can't fight everything, but how do we make these things more accessible to people? And I think that that's where your jobs as reporters that are trying to do a better job, it's when you link it in your stories, people might click on the link and learn something they never learned before, you know? So I would love to see public documents that just not even just on environmental issues, but so many things, right? Our city budgets, our state budgets, to understand that for, you know, more neighborhood people to have access to that information. I think that that's how we make a better democracy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what also comes into play there too is having the information is so important, but also making it engaging when folks are presented with it, because sometimes it could be dense, or sometimes it could be a little bit complex, or even when it isn't, and this touches on communicating on stories generally, or even the government communicating information. Sometimes it's not just having the minutes to a meeting, for example, or having a spreadsheet about what's happening in a neighborhood or a city or a state. It's sometimes about making it so when folks sit in front of it or they're on the train reading it on their phone, it's interesting and it's engaging, and to a degree, it captures them. So that also being an important part is like having it and then finding ways that people want to get involved and want to keep going and want to keep informed in that way too.
Thank you. All right, this one last question is a little bit broad. Climate change is an environmental issue, but more so for people of color, it is a race issue, a gender issue, a class issue, but also an issue that can be fixed. But in these midterm elections, how come this issue is under the radar? What specific issues we need these candidates to address?
Yeah, I mean, and I actually was disappointed at the lack of reporting on the Inflation Reduction Act in New Jersey, because the Inflation Reduction Act is going to have an impact on every single state and every single community in the U.S. and its territories. So I didn't see enough reporting connecting federal policy to the ground, and I do think I would love that would make a difference in New Jersey. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we give a lot of subsidies to fossil fuel companies. So I feel like that's maybe why it's under the radar a little bit, because there was a victory lap to say it was a climate bill. But how could it have been a climate bill if it doesn't even mention climate? It doesn't mention climate in the same at all. And there had to be a side deal struck with Senator Manchin, indicating that we would kind of approve all projects that include fossil fuel and renewable. But one secret you should know is most renewable projects don't need that heavy permitting, right? And permitting is that permission to pollute sort of thing that happens. And of course, fossil fuel companies want that to be the case. So I think these issues are too complicated and annoying, right? Who wants to talk about federal permitting if most people don't even know how a building goes up in their block? And I think that the media has, kind of taken the easy way out when it comes to climate. They sometimes I see the media being ambulance chasers when it comes to climate. They only, I love the framing you're giving now, Steven, of like, we can't just talk about it when it's hot. We need to figure out what are the educational pieces. If we're just worried, we're thinking about climate when there's a flood, then we're waiting for disaster to strike. Right. And so when there's a flood, people are not even then thinking about climate. They're thinking about the flooding of their homes, of their property, of how do they get back? How do they recover from this? Instead, how do I prevent this from happening again? And I think that's the mindset that we need to shift around in our society, and definitely in the spins of our media, is how do we prevent the worst from happening instead of reporting on tragedy after the fact? And I know that just might not be a winning business model. So I think that's why media is in this existential crisis right now.
Yeah, I mean,
so I'm excited about all of you trying to make a difference on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and I think that like the other end of it, those quicker, I guess, hotter, items that, things that are constantly happening. I know during the Hurricane Sandy reporting that we were doing, Hurricane Ian updates were literally coming on my radio and on the TV as I'm reporting on what was happening 10 years ago and what was happening last September with the remnants of Hurricane Ida. So it's almost like the other side of that is going to keep happening just by the nature of what experts tell us in the facts of climate change, but also the sort of non news headline, lower third, things that are happening are also, very much tied to what people want to and need to know in a lot of cases. Sometimes the information journalism can be just priceless, to people going about their lives in New Jersey. Were there any other questions anybody had? Not that we're toward the end here.
I think we don't have questions that were posted in the chat. So, Steven. back to you and
Yeah.
Cassandra.
Sounds good. Thanks, Oni. Maria, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to everybody for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks everyone for joining. I just want to add after this conversation, which thank you again to Steven and Maria for such a wonderful conversation and discussion about just issues that concern really all New Jerseyans and really should be better reflected in terms of what issues voters are concerned about. So I also echo that sentiment. Just a reminder to everyone that we will be sending out transcripts from this meeting, a recording, and also a list of additional experts that you can consult in your future reporting. Thanks again, everyone.